Picture this, a world turned upside down in an instant. The air grows colder, the skies darker. Lush forests that once teemed with life wither into frozen wastelands. Rivers that flowed freely now stand locked in ice. This wasn't just a harsh winter, it was a catastrophe that stretched for generations. Around 12,900 years ago, Earth was struck by a sudden and brutal cold snap known as the Younger Dryas. Temperatures plummeted, ecosystems collapsed, and for the small bands of humans scattered across the globe, survival became a daily battle against the elements. This wasn't just a change in weather, it was a fight for the future of our species. How do you rebuild when the world itself seems to turn against you? For over 1,300 years, early humans faced this very question. With every breath, they had to adapt or vanish. Food sources disappeared overnight. Shelter became a matter of life and death, and yet, against all odds, they not only survived, they thrived. The story of the Younger Dryas isn't just about ice and starvation. It's about ingenuity, resilience, and the unshakable will to endure. From the ashes of this frozen epoch, humanity emerged stronger, smarter, and more connected than ever before. So how did they do it? What secrets did our ancestors uncover in those desperate years? This is the mystery we're about to unravel. Across continents, archaeologists have pieced together clues, tools, shelters, even ancient campfires that tell a story of breathtaking adaptability. Some communities forged new paths, following migratory herds across treacherous landscapes. Others mastered the art of storing food, turning scarcity into stability. And beneath it all, one truth shines through. When faced with extinction, humanity doesn't just endure, it evolves. Join us as we step into the footsteps of those who survived the impossible and discover how the coldest chapter of our past shaped the warm, vibrant world we know today. Imagine waking up to a world where spring never comes. The Younger Dryas wasn't just a cold snap, it was Earth's climate system slamming into reverse. After centuries of gradual warming as the last ice age faded, temperatures across the northern hemisphere suddenly plummeted back to near glacial conditions in a matter of decades. Ice core records from Greenland tell the story in frozen layers. Oxygen isotopes reveal that average temperatures dropped by up to 10 degrees Celsius in some regions, a change so abrupt that ecosystems had no time to adapt. What caused this climatic whiplash? Scientists have two leading suspects. The first points to a massive influx of meltwater from collapsing ice sheets, a deluge so immense it could have disrupted the Atlantic Ocean's conveyor belt of currents. When this great oceanic heat pump stalled, warm tropical waters stopped flowing northward, plunging continents back into winter. The second theory involves something from above, debris from a disintegrating comet or asteroid, scattering across the atmosphere and blocking sunlight worldwide. Evidence like nanodiamonds in ancient soil layers and platinum spikes in ice cores hints at an extraterrestrial impact, though the debate still simmers among researchers. The consequences were apocalyptic. Forests that had stretched for thousands of miles retreated southward as tundra advanced. Grasslands that sustained mammoths and giant bison turned to dust. Along coastlines, rapidly changing sea levels drowned familiar hunting grounds while creating new ones overnight. For humans living through this upheaval, every season brought new emergencies. Winters lasted longer, growing seasons shrank by weeks. The megafauna many tribes relied on, creatures like the woolly rhino and dire wolf, began vanishing from the landscape, either hunted to extinction or unable to adapt. Yet hidden in this catastrophe was a strange gift. necessity became the mother of invention. As traditional food sources disappeared, our ancestors started noticing smaller game, experimenting with plant gathering, and developing tools to exploit new niches. Coastal communities turned to shellfish harvesting, leaving behind towering mounds of oyster shells that still mark their survival. Inland groups refined spear-throwing technology to hunt faster, more elusive prey like deer and rabbits. The very crisis that threatened to erase humanity became the forge that reshaped us, pushing scattered bands of hunter-gatherers toward innovations that would eventually give rise to agriculture, permanent settlements, and the world we know today. The ice left scars, but it also sharpened our ingenuity to a razor's edge. Beneath the layers of soil and time, the artifacts left behind tell a story of remarkable human ingenuity. At Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, massive stone pillars carved with intricate animals stand as silent witnesses to a society that thrived during this climatic chaos. What's astonishing isn't just the scale of these structures built over 11,000 years ago by hunter-gatherers, but what they represent: cooperation. In a world where survival was a daily struggle, people came together to create something enduring, suggesting that shared purpose became their lifeline. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Clovis culture left behind a trail of distinctive fluted spear points, their sharp edges telling tales of adaptation. As large game grew scarce, these tools evolved smaller, lighter, and more precise, designed for hunting nimble prey like deer or even birds. The landscape itself became a canvas for human resilience. Archaeologists find campsites clustered near rivers and lakes, revealing a strategy of constant movement to follow water and game. At sites like Monte Verde in Chile, preserved footprints and wooden tools show how families adapted to shifting environments, building temporary shelters from mammoth bones or woven reeds. But perhaps the most telling clues come from the garbage heaps of history middens filled with fish bones, snail shells, and charred seeds. These weren't just meals, they were experiments. When familiar foods vanished, our ancestors sampled over 50 new plant species in some regions, turning desperation into discovery. Toolkits diversified too. Beyond weapons, archaeologists uncover grinding stones for processing nuts, woven nets for fishing, and even early forms of food storage like pits lined with clay. At Abu Huraira in Syria, traces of wild rye and lentils show how people began selecting and cultivating plants, a quiet revolution that would later blossom into agriculture. Every broken tool, every butchered bone, every hearth ringed with stones whispers the same truth. Flexibility was survival, and as the ice tightened its grip, humanity's greatest weapon wasn't strength but creativity. The next chapter of this story lies in their plates: how changing diets didn't just sustain bodies but reshaped cultures. When the mammoths disappeared and the great herds dwindled, humanity's menu had to change, and fast. The Younger Dryas forced our ancestors to become culinary innovators, turning desperation into a dietary revolution. Gone were the days of relying on a single massive kill to feed a tribe for weeks. Instead, survival meant thinking smaller, faster, and more diversely. Deer, rabbits, and even rodents became prized targets, pushing hunters to refine their techniques. Spears gave way to lightweight atlatls, a kind of prehistoric slingshot that could launch projectiles with terrifying accuracy. But the real game changer was teamwork. Communal drives where groups worked together to funnel panicked deer into narrow gullies or off cliffs, turned individual hunters into a coordinated force. These weren't just meals, they were masterclasses in strategy and trust. Meanwhile, along coastlines and rivers, another transformation was unfolding. As if sensing the land's growing scarcity, people turned their gaze to the water. Fish weirs ingenious traps woven from branches appeared in shallow streams, harvesting trout and salmon by the dozens. Shellfish became a lifeline, their shells piling high in middens that still dot ancient shorelines today, but perhaps the most surprising survival food. Plants. In a world where fruit trees struggled and familiar greens vanished, our ancestors learned to dig deeper literally. Hardy tubers like cattails packed with starchy calories were dug from frozen marshes. Acorns, bitter when raw, were leached in running water for days to remove toxins, then ground into flour. Every bite was hard, one knowledge passed between generations, a testament to human adaptability. Preservation became as vital as the hunt itself. Smoking and drying meat transformed fleeting abundance into lasting security. In the high latitudes, early humans buried meat in permafrost, nature's first freezer. Further south, pits lined with birch bark stored nuts through lean winters. These weren't just practical solutions, they were the birth of foresight, of planning beyond the next storm. Modern hunter-gatherers like the San people of the Kalahari offer glimpses into this ancient resilience. Their encyclopedic knowledge of over 100 edible plants mirrors the ingenuity of Younger Dryas survivors. Yet none of this could have happened alone. Sharing knowledge about which plants were safe, coordinating complex hunts, guarding stored food, these tasks wove individuals into something greater. A single person might starve, but a community could innovate. Around smoky fires, as stories mixed with the scent of roasting venison, the seeds of society itself were taking root. The next chapter of survival wouldn't be written by lone heroes, but by the collective strength of voices raised together against the cold. The bitter winds of the Younger Dryas didn't just reshape landscapes, they forged new kinds of human connection. Survival was no longer a solo pursuit. When the cold came creeping, people huddled closer, discovering that warmth wasn't just found in fire, but in fellowship. Across continents, scattered bands began weaving themselves into something stronger, communities where every pair of hands had purpose. Archaeologists trace this shift through the remains of ancient villages, where the bones of long-ago meals tell a story of shared labor. A single mammoth carcass could feed dozens, but only if hunters coordinated their strikes and families worked together to butcher, preserve, and distribute the meat. This wasn't just teamwork, it was the birth of social contracts where the success of one became the survival of all. Trade routes became lifelines, stretching hundreds of miles across frozen terrain. In places like eastern Anatolia, obsidian, a volcanic glass prized for razor-sharp tools, traveled far from its sources, passed hand to hand through networks of trust. A spear point found in a cave might have originated from a distant mountain, proof that even in hardship, people invested in connections beyond their immediate circle. But it wasn't just goods being exchanged. Along these routes flowed knowledge, which plants could cure fevers, how to track migrating caribou, or ways to predict the first frost. Every traveler became a living library, carrying survival tips across generations. Shelters evolved too, reflecting the new emphasis on collective warmth. On the steppes of Eurasia, families dug pit houses into the earth, their sunken floors trapping heat while roof openings let smoke escape. In North America, the remains of longhouses reveal extended families living elbow to elbow, their body heat compounding under thick layers of hides. These weren't just dwellings, they were experiments in social architecture where the very layout of space encouraged cooperation. Even children had roles, grinding seeds or weaving baskets, their small hands contributing to the whole. Yet perhaps the most powerful glue holding these groups together wasn't physical but spiritual. Around flickering fires, elders spun stories of ancestors who overcame impossible odds, their words stitching resilience into the fabric of memory. Rituals like burying the dead with ochre or carving animal figures offered a sense of control in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. A shaman's chant, a dancer's steps, the shared silence of watching the stars, these moments reminded people they were part of something larger than themselves. And from this web of relationships sprang humanity's next great leap forward, when a hunter shared a new way to bind stone to wood, or a gatherer discovered how to store seeds for planting. That knowledge didn't die with its creator. It rippled through the community, refined by many hands. The same social bonds that kept people warm at night would soon ignite a spark of invention, paving the way for tools that didn't just adapt to the Ice Age, but helped end it. When resources grew scarce and every scrap of material mattered, humanity's toolkit underwent a quiet revolution. The days of crafting massive spearheads from prized stone gave way to something far more ingenious: microliths. These tiny, razor-sharp flakes, often no larger than a fingernail, became the building blocks of survival. By slotting them into wooden or bone shafts, hunters created composite tools with replaceable parts, a breakthrough as transformative as swapping out a dull blade today. A single broken tip no longer meant discarding an entire weapon. Just pop out the damaged microlith and slot in a fresh one. This wasn't just efficiency, it was resourcefulness honed by necessity. Compare the toolkits before and after the Younger Dryas, and the shift is startling. Earlier periods favored grand, showy blades, exquisite but wasteful, requiring entire chunks of precious stone. Post-cold snap, every fragment had value. Flint nodules were flaked down to the last sliver, their edges serrated into saws or drills. When stone grew scarce, bone and antler stepped in, softer but far more versatile. A deer antler could be carved into fishhooks, needles, or even chisels for woodworking. At Starcar in England, archaeologists unearthed a stunning headdress made from red deer skulls, proof that even tools could carry cultural weight. But the real genius lay in specialization. Different environments demanded different solutions. Tundra dwellers crafted heavy scrapers for processing hides into windproof clothing. Coastal groups fashioned barbed harpoons to wrestle salmon from icy rivers. Forest hunters developed lightweight projectile points for striking fast-moving prey. This wasn't a one-size-fits-all survival strategy. It was a sprawling catalog of localized ingenuity. And with these innovations came mobility. Lightweight toolkits allowed bands to venture farther, chasing game into landscapes once deemed uninhabitable. Microliths could be carried in pouches, assembled on site, then repurposed, ideal for groups constantly on the move. Traces of these tools now mark ancient migration routes like breadcrumbs, across the Bering Land Bridge, down the Pacific coast, through ice-free corridors in North America. Each tiny blade whispers of families who refused to be cornered by the cold, who turned constraint into creativity. Their legacy wasn't just survival, it was the unstoppable human instinct to explore. When the ice tightened its grip, humanity didn't just endure, it moved. Like water finding cracks in stone, our ancestors flowed toward refugia, those rare pockets of stability where life still thrived. River valleys became lifelines, their winding paths offering fish, fresh water, and corridors through frozen landscapes. Coastal zones where ocean currents moderated the cold turned into bustling hubs of survival. Archaeologists trace these migrations through more than just arrowheads and campfires. Hidden in our very DNA are clues to epic journeys. Genetic studies reveal how populations from Europe to the Americas share markers dating back to the Younger Dryas, proof that this wasn't just a time of suffering, but of astonishing connectivity. But these treks were far from safe. Every new valley held unknowns, unfamiliar predators like cave lions or short-faced bears, territories claimed by rival bands, or landscapes that could turn lethal without warning. Imagine crossing a glacier-fed river, your feet numb with cold, knowing one misstep could drag you under, or venturing into forests where the snap of a twig might mean an ambush. Yet the alternative, staying put as resources vanished, was often deadlier. Mobility became a calculated risk, with every decision weighing hunger against danger. Some groups chose semi-sedentary lives, returning to seasonal camps where stored food or predictable migrations offered temporary security. Others became nomads, their entire existence a dance with the horizon. The legacy of these journeys lingers in more than bones and tools. As bands crossed mountains and plains, they carried stories, techniques, and worldviews that blended at crossroads. A tool-making style from the Caucasus might appear thousands of miles away, adapted by hands that had never met its inventors. Oral traditions passed down over hundreds of generations still echo with tales of great cold or floods, suggesting collective memories of this tumultuous era. Even today, indigenous cultures from the Arctic to the Andes preserve survival knowledge that likely traces back to Younger Dryas adaptations. What began as desperate flight gradually shaped identities. The same river that fed a community also anchored its myths. A mountain pass that once marked a perilous crossing might later become a sacred boundary. Survival wasn't just about finding food, it was about weaving meaning into the landscape, turning unfamiliar terrain into home. And as the ice finally loosened its hold, these scattered threads of human experience would intertwine into something extraordinary, the first glimmers of art, ritual, and shared belief that transcended mere survival. The cold had forced us to wander, but it also taught us how to belong. Deep in the caves of Lascaux and Altamira, flickering torchlight once illuminated something extraordinary, not just images of bison and mammoths, but a testament to the human spirit's refusal to be broken. These intricate paintings, created during the Younger Dryas, were far more than early art. They were survival tactics etched in ochre and charcoal. When the world outside grew hostile, these subterranean galleries became sanctuaries where fear could be transformed into beauty. Handprints pressed onto rock walls speak of identity and belonging, while herds of charging animals suggest something profound. By capturing the essence of their prey in pigment, hunters may have been asserting control over an increasingly unpredictable environment. This wasn't mere decoration, it was a psychological lifeline, a way to process loss and reaffirm purpose in the face of despair. Across Europe, tiny sculptures like the Venus of Willendorf tell another layer of this story. Carved from stone during the coldest years, these figurines, with their exaggerated curves, likely symbolized fertility and abundance. In a time when childbirth was perilous and food scarce, they may have served as talismans of hope, grounding communities in the belief that life would endure. Archaeologists find these figures in hearths and burial sites, suggesting they were touched, carried, perhaps even whispered to in moments of desperation. Their very existence hints at shared ritual ceremonies where stories were told, fears confessed, and resilience collectively forged. The act of creation itself became a form of resistance. Engraved bones from this period reveal intricate patterns, zigzags, spirals, even early calendars tracking lunar cycles. These weren't idle doodles, but coded knowledge passed between generations. A marking on a reindeer antler might record migration patterns, while a series of dots could map the best seasons for gathering berries. Art and utility blurred, becoming tools for memory in a world without writing. Perhaps most strikingly, these expressions reveal a profound shift in human consciousness. Where earlier artifacts focused on survival alone, Younger Dryas art begins grappling with abstraction, the idea of things unseen. A cave painting of a half-human, half-beast figure in Chauvet hints at spiritual awakening. a reaching beyond the physical struggle to make meaning of suffering. This emergence of symbolism laid the foundation for everything that followed: religion, storytelling, even law. Around fires, as elders recounted the exploits of mythical ancestors or explained the stars' patterns, they weren't just entertaining, they were building the mental frameworks that would carry humanity from survival to civilization. These cultural innovations didn't just help people endure the cold, they rewired our capacity to imagine. A handprint on a wall, a figurine clutched in prayer, a story carved into bone, each was a defiant declaration that even in the darkest winter, the human mind could still create light. And from these small, stubborn acts of beauty, the seeds of agriculture, architecture, and empire would eventually grow. The Ice Age demanded adaptation, but it was this flowering of creativity that ensured adaptation became evolution. In the teeth of the Younger Dryas cold, fire wasn't just comfort, it was life itself. A single flickering flame meant the difference between watching your breath freeze in the air and thawing fingers enough to grip a tool. But mastering fire in this icy world was no simple feat. Imagine trying to ignite damp tinder with numb hands, the wind howling around you, your only tools a piece of flint and a handful of dry moss. Survival hinged on techniques passed through generations, carving friction fire drills from resilient hardwoods, striking iron pyrite against flint to send sparks into bundles of birch bark, a material so flammable it could catch light even in drizzle. Archaeologists find the echoes of these struggles in the remains of ancient hearths. At Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, clay-lined fire pits dating back to the coldest years show deliberate design shallow depressions to concentrate heat, surrounded by stones that radiated warmth long after the flames died down. Some sites reveal even cleverer adaptations: underground air channels dug beneath fires to keep oxygen flowing, turning smoldering embers into roaring blazes. These weren't just cooking spots, they were the heart of every shelter, the place where families gathered to mend tools, tell stories, and guard against the predators drawn by their vulnerability. Fire transformed more than just the night's chill. With its heat, our ancestors could render tough mammoth hides into supple leather, scraping away fat with stone blades before smoking the skins to prevent rot. At Mezhorich in Ukraine, excavations uncovered entire huts built from bones and tusks, their walls likely draped with fire-cured hides that blocked the wind's bite. Even food became safer: parasites in meat killed by thorough cooking, toxic plants like wild almonds rendered edible through roasting. The same flames that warded off cave lions and dire wolves also unlocked nutrients, turning scarce meals into efficient fuel for starving bodies. But perhaps fire's greatest gift was time. Before its mastery, daylight dictated every activity. Now, flickering torchlight extended the workday, carving tools by firelight, weaving reeds into baskets, or grinding seeds into flour. This stolen time accelerated innovation, turning survival into something more, the beginnings of craftsmanship. In the glow of those ancient hearths, humanity wasn't just enduring the Ice Age, it was laying the groundwork for everything that followed, one carefully tended spark at a time. Stitching survival into every seam, our ancestors turned animal hides into high-tech armor against the cold. Imagine scraping the flesh from a freshly killed reindeer hide with stone tools, then stretching and curing it for days, not just for warmth, but as a matter of life or death. The invention of bone needles, some as thin as toothpicks with eyelets drilled by stone awls, revolutionized clothing from mere coverings to tailored protection. Threads made of sinew, the tough tendons from game animals stitched double-layered garments with fur lining inward to trap body heat. At Sungir in Russia, archaeologists uncovered a child's burial from this era, wrapped in over 3,000 ivory beads, suggesting parkas adorned with intricate patterns that may have signaled identity or status. These weren't just clothes, they were portable ecosystems with hoods to prevent heat loss and flaps designed to vent sweat during exertion. Shelter designs diversified like the landscapes they occupied. On the frigid steppes of Ukraine, hunters constructed dome-shaped huts from the very bones of their prey. Mammoth skulls formed foundations, while interlocking tusks arched overhead like cathedral ribs, all covered in stitched hides. One excavated dwelling at Mezherych used bones from nearly 100 mammoths, proving communal effort could conquer even the harshest elements. Meanwhile, nomadic bands developed lighter solutions, conical tents with wooden frames that could be dismantled and carried, their walls insulated with layers of grass or moss between hides. Coastal groups wove reed mats into windbreaks, angling them against prevailing gales. Each design reflected an intimate knowledge of local materials and microclimates, the difference between freezing and thriving. Medicine emerged as another frontline defense against the cold's invisible threats. Frostbite, infections from cuts, and respiratory illnesses haunted every community. But buried in the archaeological record are traces of astonishing medical ingenuity. At Shanidar Cave, a burial from this period shows healed bone fractures, proof someone cared for the injured until they mended. Chewed birch bark found at German sites contains betulin, a compound still used today as an anti-inflammatory. Herbal poultices from yarrow and chamomile likely treated wounds, while pine resin served as prehistoric antiseptic glue for sealing lacerations. Even dentistry appears. A 6,000-year-old beeswax filling discovered in Slovenia hints at earlier experimentation during the Younger Dryas. These weren't random acts of desperation, they were the beginnings of systematized healing, passed down through generations as oral encyclopedias of survival. The true breakthrough lay in prevention rather than cure. Smoky fires reduced airborne pathogens in cramped dwellings, while grease rendered from animal bones protected skin against frostbite like ancient moisturizer. Childbirth moved indoors with heated stones placed near mothers to stabilize newborns' temperatures. Every innovation from a needle's eye to a healing herb wove together into a safety net that turned individual vulnerability into collective resilience. When the wind howled and the ice spread, it was this web of knowledge stitched into clothing, shelter, and medicine that kept the embers of humanity alive. Beneath the frozen ground, hidden in the cracks of ancient hearths and burial sites, lies evidence of humanity's first pharmacies. When a broken bone or infected wound could mean death, our ancestors turned to the land itself for healing. Willow bark, chewed or brewed into tea, offered relief from pain centuries before scientists isolated its active ingredient, salicylic acid, the foundation of modern aspirin. Yarrow, with its feathery leaves and bitter taste, became nature's bandage, packed into wounds to slow bleeding and fight infection thanks to its natural astringent properties. Even today, traditional healers from the Arctic to the Amazon reach for these same plants, their uses preserved in oral traditions stretching back to the Younger Dryas. But medicine wasn't just about herbs. Skeletal remains tell darker, more daring stories. Skulls from this period show precise holes drilled or scraped into bone, a practice called trepanation. Far from random mutilation, these surgeries reveal astonishing skill. Flint or obsidian tools were used to carefully remove circular sections of the skull, likely to relieve pressure from head injuries or what ancient healers might have seen as evil spirits. Remarkably, many patients survived, their bones showing signs of healing around the edges of these openings. This wasn't mere desperation, it was calculated risk-taking, a testament to healers who mapped the human body through trial and error long before textbooks existed. Childbirth in this frozen epoch was its own kind of battlefield. Without modern medicine, complications that are routine today became life or death crises. Women relied on midwives versed in herbal remedies, raspberry leaf to strengthen contractions, licorice root to ease pain, while heated stones and animal furs created makeshift delivery beds. Infant mortality was high, but discoveries like carved Venus figurines, often buried with the dead, suggest deep cultural rituals around fertility and loss. Swaddling clothes made from softened hides protected newborns from the cold, while communal childcare ensured that even if a mother perished, her child might still be nursed by other women in the group. The true breakthrough wasn't just in treating illness but in preventing it. Smoke from juniper branches purified air in cramped dwellings, while fermented foods introduced gut-healthy bacteria. Birch tar, painstakingly distilled from tree bark, served as both glue for tools and an antiseptic for wounds. Every remedy, whether a poultice of honey and mold, an early antibiotic, or the strategic placement of campfires to reduce respiratory infections, was hard-won knowledge passed down through generations. Survival wasn't just about enduring the cold, it was about rewriting the rules of human vulnerability, one healing touch at a time. In the relentless cold of the Younger Dryas, every newborn's first cry was both a miracle and a gamble. Infant mortality rates soared. Archaeologists estimate nearly half of all children died before age 5. Their tiny bones often found curled in shallow graves lined with ochre or nestled with carved amulets. Yet those who survived did so because of an unbreakable web of communal care. Mothers weren't left to shoulder the burden alone. Aunts, elders, and even older siblings took turns cradling babies, allowing exhausted parents to hunt or gather. This wasn't just kindness, it was survival math. In a world where one missed meal could doom a nursing mother's milk supply, shared childcare became as vital as shared food. Weaning was a precarious tightrope walk. Too early, and a child's underdeveloped system couldn't process tough meats or fibrous plants. Too late, and a mother's depleted body might not conceive again, threatening the group's future. The solution: ingenious transitional foods. Excavations reveal hollowed-out animal bones repurposed as baby bottles, their interiors stained with residues of mashed tubers and pre-chewed meat. At sites in Germany, traces of milk fat clinging to ancient pottery suggest some groups may have domesticated early goats or reindeer for dairy, a revolutionary buffer against starvation. But the real lifeline came from the land itself. Nutrient-rich bird eggs, pulverized seeds mixed with water, and even fermented fish paste provided the delicate balance of proteins and fats tiny bodies needed to thrive. Mobility demanded innovation too. Cradleboard's rigid frames lined with moss or rabbit fur became nomadic nurseries, allowing mothers to strap infants securely to their backs while traversing icy ravines or fleeing predators. Some designs, like those used by ancestral Pueblo peoples centuries later, likely originated in this era: adjustable lacing for growth, arched hoods to shield against snow, and dangling amulets to stimulate curious fingers. These weren't just carriers, they were microcosms of cultural knowledge, each stitch encoding generations of child-rearing wisdom. But the greatest threat often lurked beyond the firelight. As ecosystems collapsed, desperate predators like cave hyenas and saber-toothed cats grew bolder, drawn by the scent of vulnerable young. At Grotta Paglixi in Italy, fossilized footprints tell a chilling story. A child's bare steps suddenly breaking into a run, the deeper impressions of an adult sweeping in to snatch them up, all preserved in millennia-old mud. Defensive strategies emerged, mothers smearing birth fluids with ash to mask newborn scent, groups posting rotating guards during vulnerable nights, even training dogs recently domesticated from wolves to stand sentinel. The true measure of resilience wasn't just in keeping children alive, but in weaving their survival into the fabric of community. Lullabies hummed in forgotten tongues carried warnings about wandering too far. Games with carved figurines taught which plants were poisonous. Every scraped knee treated with antiseptic moss, every fever cooled with willow bark tea, was a victory against the Ice Age's relentless odds. And when a child finally took their first unassisted steps not on the warm soils of some forgotten paradise, but on the frost-hardened ground of a world reshaped by cold, it was a testament to humanity's most powerful instinct to nurture the future, even when the present seemed determined to extinguish it. The crack of a twig in the darkness wasn't just noise, it was a death sentence waiting to happen. As the Younger Dryas squeezed ecosystems to their breaking point, desperate predators like dire wolves and saber-toothed cats turned human camps into hunting grounds. These weren't the skittish animals of today. Dire wolves, bulkier than modern grey wolves with bone-crushing jaws, hunted in packs that could surround a lone traveler in seconds. And then there were the saber-toothed, muscular ambush predators with serrated fangs longer than human fingers, capable of dragging a grown adult into the shadows before a scream could echo. Survival meant thinking like prey while acting as a predator. Fire became the first line of defense. Rings of flames encircled camps at night, their light reflecting off the eyes of lurking beasts. At La Brea tar pits, fossils tell a grim story. Dire wolf bones tangled with human tools, evidence of deadly standoffs over carcasses. But our ancestors didn't just hide, they innovated. Pit traps lined with sharpened stakes appeared near migration routes, disguised under layers of brush. Some groups fashioned early alarms from sinew and hollow bones, rigging tripwires that would clatter when disturbed. And when confrontation was unavoidable, they turned predators' instincts against them. At Goyet Cave in Belgium, archaeologists found wolf skulls with precisely placed fractures, suggesting humans exploited pack hierarchy by targeting alpha males to incite infighting. Hunting strategies shifted dramatically to avoid becoming prey themselves. Daylight became safer, pushing groups to track game at dawn when big cats were less active. Smaller, faster prey like rabbits replaced risky megafauna hunts, a trade-off that meant more effort for fewer calories but kept hunters out of a saber-tooth's ambush range. Coastal communities had their own nightmares. Giant short-faced bears, towering 12 feet tall, would raid shellfish caches. The solution, smoking fish inland and leaving decoy piles farther down the beach as distractions. Yet the psychological toll was relentless. Skeletal remains show healed bite marks and claw scars, proof that many survived attacks but carried the trauma. Sleep deprivation likely haunted these communities, with shifts taking turns to guard the fire. Some anthropologists believe this era birthed our deepest fears, the reason modern humans still startle at rustling bushes or feel unease in darkness. The Ice Age didn't just shape our tools and diets, it rewired our minds, leaving an inheritance of hypervigilance passed down through millennia. Every shadow held teeth, and every silence was too loud, a world where survival meant living on the knife's edge between hunger and becoming hunted. The weight of endless winters didn't just press on the body, it gnawed at the mind. Imagine the psychological toll of watching your world shrink season by season, knowing each sunrise brought not warmth, but another day of gnawing hunger and lurking predators. Modern studies of Arctic explorers and isolated Antarctic researchers reveal what ancient bones cannot. Prolonged cold and darkness rewire human cognition, triggering depression, irrational anger, even hallucinations. Yet Younger Dryas communities didn't just collapse under this strain. They developed sophisticated mental coping mechanisms that still echo in our behavior today. Ritual became medicine for the soul. At Göbekli Tepe, circular enclosures with towering stone pillars suggest gatherings where rhythmic dancing and chanting united communities in shared trance states. Neuroscientists now recognize such synchronized movement releases endorphins, nature's painkillers, while lowering cortisol, the stress hormone. A shaman's drumbeat wasn't mere performance. Its steady pulse likely induced theta brainwaves, easing anxiety much like modern music therapy for PTSD patients. Even the act of carving animal figures found by the thousands across Ice Age sites may have functioned as a kind of prehistoric art therapy, externalizing fears through creative expression. Social bonding rituals took on life or death importance. Shared meals like the communal roasting of a single prized reindeer activated the vagus nerve through laughter and storytelling, strengthening group cohesion while literally slowing heart rates. Anthropologists observing modern hunter-gatherers note how gossip and humor serve as tension release valves in high-stress environments. The same likely held true around Ice Age fires, where impersonations of bumbling hunters or exaggerated tales of narrow escapes diffused the constant background terror of existence. Remarkably, some survival strategies backfired in unexpected ways. The human tendency toward negativity bias, hardwired during crises to prioritize threat detection, left an enduring mark on our psychology. Brain scans show modern humans still process bad news more thoroughly than good, a vestige of millennia spent scanning landscapes for danger. Yet this very adaptation birthed resilience. Studies of disaster survivors reveal that those who can reframe trauma as a challenge rather than a threat recover faster, a mindset Ice Age people mastered through oral traditions celebrating ancestral perseverance. The legacy of these mental adaptations surrounds us, that urge to hum when nervous, a descendant of stress-soothing Ice Age chants, the comfort found in repetitive tasks like knitting or whittling. An echo of hide-scraping meditations, even our modern obsession with apocalyptic fiction may stem from deep memory, a way to rehearse survival without genuine peril. When contemporary psychologists teach mindfulness techniques or group therapy, they're unknowingly channeling 12,000-year-old wisdom, that the mind, like a flint blade, must be carefully maintained to stay sharp in the long winter of existence. The trials of the Younger Dryas didn't just forge survival strategies, they rewired humanity's genetic and cultural blueprint in ways that ripple through our modern lives. When the ice finally retreated around 11,600 years ago, it left behind more than thawed landscapes. It had sculpted a new kind of human. Take lactose tolerance, a biological adaptation that seems worlds away from frozen tundras. For most mammals, the ability to digest milk disappears after infancy, yet today, over 1/3 of adults globally retain this trait. The secret lies in those desperate millennia, as dairy-rich animals like reindeer and wild goats became critical protein sources during the cold snap. Mutations allowing lactose digestion into adulthood offered a staggering survival edge. DNA studies pinpoint the gene's proliferation to populations under extreme nutritional stress, proof that the Ice Age's knife-edge pressures literally altered our biology. But the legacy runs deeper than genetics. The same environmental instability that made hunting unreliable planted the seeds of agriculture. In the Fertile Crescent, where wild wheat and barley clung to life, Younger Dryas survivors had already mastered the art of grinding seeds and storing surplus. When warming returned, these stopgap measures blossomed into deliberate cultivation. The first domesticated grains, like the tough, drought-resistant Emma wheat, bore the fingerprints of their Ice Age ancestors, selectively bred from wild strains that had weathered the cold. Even early irrigation techniques echoed survival strategies from the drought-prone Younger Dryas, where diverting scarce water meant life or death. yet some myths stubbornly cling to this epoch. Popular theories paint the Younger Dryas as a clean slate, a disaster that wiped the board for human innovation. The truth is messier and more fascinating. Archaeological layers show continuity, not erasure. Flint knapping techniques from pre-cold snap periods reappear in later tools, their designs refined by necessity. Oral traditions among indigenous groups like the Ojibwe and Inuit contain echoes of climatic upheaval, suggesting knowledge wasn't lost but transformed. The real breakthrough wasn't starting over, it was building upon 12,000 years of accumulated ingenuity. Perhaps the most enduring misconception is that humanity merely endured the Younger Dryas. In reality, we absorbed it. The cooperative child-rearing networks birthed in icy camps became the social glue of early villages. The omnivorous diets forced by scarcity diversified our gut microbiomes, making modern humans uniquely adaptable eaters. Even our relationship with time changed. Storage pits and preserved foods required planning months ahead, rewiring our brains for delayed gratification. The Ice Age didn't just test our limits, it expanded them, turning survival into an inheritance of resilience coded into our bones, our stories, and the very rhythm of how we shape the world. The Younger Dryas has long been a magnet for wild speculation, from tales of lost civilizations to apocalyptic extinction events. But let's separate fact from fantasy. Contrary to sensational claims, humanity didn't teeter on the brink of annihilation. Archaeological evidence shows continuous occupation across continents, with tool-making traditions and burial sites proving our ancestors not only survived but adapted. The myth of a sudden human reset crumbles under scrutiny. DNA studies reveal unbroken genetic lineages stretching before, during, and after the cold snap. Even the once popular Clovis comet theory, which blamed an extraterrestrial impact for the cooling, has been largely debunked by rigorous sediment analysis showing no continent-wide fire layer or impact craters from that era. Then there's the Atlantis elephant in the room. Pseudo-history loves linking the Younger Dryas to Plato's sunken city, often pointing to underwater structures like Japan's Yonaguni Monument as proof. But geologists confirm these formations are natural bedrock shaped by tides and tectonic shifts, not drowned temples. Real science tells a subtler story. While rising seas did swallow coastal areas like Doggerland in the North Sea, the flooding was gradual over centuries, not a single catastrophic event. The truth is, humanity's greatest triumphs during this period weren't glittering metropolises, but quieter victories like the invention of needle and thread or the first experiments with seed storage. What makes these myths dangerous isn't just their inaccuracy, it's how they overshadow the real lessons of the Younger Dryas. Unlike today's climate crisis, which stems from human activity, that ancient cooling was a natural phenomenon. Yet the parallels are uncanny. Both eras forced rapid adaptation, where our ancestors shifted from megafauna hunting to broad-spectrum foraging. We're now transitioning from fossil fuels to renewables. The key difference: they had no warning. Ice core data reveals the Younger Dryas' onset was astronomically fast. Temperatures in Greenland dropped 7 degrees Celsius in under a decade. By comparison, modern climate change gives us foresight, and with it, responsibility. The real legacy of this epoch isn't lost cities or cosmic disasters, but a blueprint for resilience. When lakes froze over, humans didn't wait for thaw, they invented ice fishing. When caves grew crowded, they engineered portable shelters. That same ingenuity now faces a new test, not a sudden freeze, but a slow burn. The Younger Dryas teaches us that survival isn't about avoiding change, but embracing it with creativity, cooperation, and the courage to discard old ways when the world demands new answers. The echoes of the Younger Dryas whisper urgent lessons for our own era of climate upheaval. While our ancestors faced ice where we face fire, their playbook for resilience holds startling relevance. Take the indigenous Sami people of Scandinavia, whose reindeer herding traditions trace back to Younger Dryas survival strategies. Their practice of rotational grazing, moving herds across vast tundra to prevent overgrazing, mirrors ancient adaptation to scarce resources. Today, scientists collaborate with Sami elders to apply this time-tested wisdom to modern pasture management, proving that sustainability isn't just about new technology, but often about reviving old wisdom. Modern climate science is catching up to what Ice Age survivors knew instinctively. Diversity equals resilience. Where Younger Dryas foragers expanded their diets to include over 50 new plant species, contemporary agricultural researchers now advocate polyculture farming, growing multiple crop varieties together to buffer against pests and drought. The Hopi Nation's drought-resistant Three Sisters planting method, corn, beans, and squash growing symbiotically, shares DNA with prehistoric survival tactics. Archaeobotanists studying 12,000-year-old seed caches find the same principle at work. Storing diverse genetic strains ensured some would thrive no matter how the climate shifted. Yet some questions remain tantalizingly unanswered. Why did certain societies collapse during the Younger Dryas while others not only survived but innovated? Ongoing research at sites like Abu Hurira suggests social flexibility, not just technology, made the difference. Groups that shared resources equally and integrated outsiders weathered crises better than rigid hierarchies. This insight fuels today's climate justice movements, highlighting how equitable societies recover faster from disasters. Other mysteries linger. How did oral traditions preserve survival knowledge across 300 generations? Linguists analyzing Proto-Indo-European myths find recurring symbols of climate catastrophe, suggesting storytelling itself became a survival tool. The most profound parallel lies in mindset. Faced with an existential threat, our ancestors didn't wait for normalcy to return. They redefined what normal meant. Their legacy challenges us to do the same, not merely to endure climate change, but to let it transform us into something more adaptable, more connected, more ingenious. As permafrost thaws to reveal ancient tools and campfires, we're reminded that resilience isn't about returning to how things were. It's about building something new from the pieces left behind. The Ice Age taught humanity to dance with uncertainty. Now the music has changed, but the steps remain. For all we've uncovered about the Younger Dryas, some puzzles still taunt researchers like half-finished Ice Age etchings. Take the mysterious black matte layers, thin bands of dark soil found at sites across North America, rich in charcoal and nanodiamonds. Some scientists argue these mark the comet impact that triggered the cooling, yet others point to identical layers formed by wetland algae blooms. The debate rages in labs and field sites, with each new discovery raising fresh questions. Even more perplexing are the gaps in the archaeological record, entire centuries where human activity seems to vanish, only to reappear with radically different toolkits. Were these silent periods mass migrations we haven't traced, or simply seasons when survival left no trace? Then there's the riddle of the missing megafauna. While woolly mammoths and giant ground sloths dwindled during the cold snap, some species like bison not only survived but thrived. DNA analysis reveals a fascinating clue. Bison populations show a genetic bottleneck right before the Younger Dryas, suggesting they'd already evolved tougher constitutions. Did certain animals somehow sense the coming freeze and adapt in advance? Or was their survival tied to human hunting patterns we don't yet understand? The answers may lie in newly developed techniques like environmental DNA sampling, where a single scoop of permafrost can reveal entire extinct ecosystems. One of the most tantalizing mysteries centers on the refugia people, groups that flourished in unlikely oases during the deepest freeze. At Spain's El Morón cave, archaeologists uncovered a nearly 12,000-year-old burial site dubbed the Red Lady, her bones stained with ochre and surrounded by seashells from distant coasts. How did this community maintain trade networks when much of Europe stood frozen? Their secret might be written in the cave walls, literally. Microscopic analysis of the limestone reveals layers of lichens and mosses that could have provided emergency nutrition, suggesting these survivors mastered micro-environments invisible to the untrained eye. The emerging field of climate archaeology offers hope for solving these puzzles. By combining ice core data with cave stalagmite growth rings and tree ring sequences, scientists are building hyper-detailed timelines of the Younger Dryas. Already, this work has revealed unexpected nuances. The cooling wasn't one unbroken freeze, but a roller coaster of minor warm spells that may have offered crucial respites. As researchers employ artificial intelligence to scan satellite images for hidden settlement patterns and underwater archaeologists explore drowned coastlines, we stand on the brink of revelations that could rewrite our understanding of human resilience. Nowhere are these lessons more vivid than at the Ukrainian site of Mezherych, where a cluster of mammoth bone huts stands as a testament to ingenuity in the face of desperation. Here, amidst the frozen steppes, families transformed the skeletons of their vanished prey into arched dwellings, each bone placed with precision to withstand blizzards. The floors tell their own story: layers of crushed herbs that repelled insects, hearths positioned for maximum heat retention, and even what appears to be an early play area marked by concentrations of small, polished bones. These weren't just shelters, they were blueprints for survival, designed by people who refused to let the ice dictate their fate. Their story, etched in tusk and tendon, reminds us that humanity's greatest discoveries often emerge from our darkest winters. Among the most enigmatic survivors of the Younger Dryas were the Clovis people, whose distinctive spear points, fluted like the grooves of a classical column, have been found strewn across North America from Texas to Maine. These weren't just tools, they were masterpieces of Ice Age engineering, designed to snap cleanly at the base upon impact, allowing hunters to quickly reload without wrestling a wounded mammoth. But what truly set the Clovis apart was their adaptability. At the Lena site in Arizona, excavations revealed not just mammoth bones alongside their signature points, but also remains of smaller game turtles, rabbits, even freshwater clams painted the picture of a culture diversifying its diet as megafauna dwindled. Their campsites tell a story of calculated mobility, clustered near water sources yet spaced to avoid overhunting, suggesting an intimate understanding of ecological balance long before the term existed. The mystery deepens when we examine their sudden disappearance from the archaeological record around 12,800 years ago, just as the Younger Dryas tightened its grip. Some researchers argue they didn't vanish so much as evolve, their toolkits shrinking alongside their prey. At the Galt site in Texas, later layers show Clovis points gradually giving way to smaller, more varied implements, needle-like drills for processing hides, thumbnail-sized scrapers for rendering plant fibers. This wasn't decline, it was reinvention. Others point to genetic evidence suggesting population turnover, with Clovis lineages potentially absorbed by incoming groups like the Folsom people, whose own finely crafted points appear like ghostly successors in the soil layers above. The debate mirrors broader questions about human migration during this chaotic epoch. While the Clovis first theory once dominated, positing they were the earliest Americans, discoveries like Chile's Monte Verde, occupied over 14,500 years ago, shattered that narrative. Now, scientists grapple with multiple migration waves, coastal voyagers skirting the Pacific by boat, inland travelers exploiting ice-free corridors, and perhaps even hardy bands crossing Atlantic ice shelves. What's clear is that no single strategy guaranteed survival. At the Shawnee Minisink site in Pennsylvania, layers of charred fish bones and carbonized seeds reveal a community thriving on riverine abundance, while simultaneously, just a few hundred miles west, other groups clung to fading mammoth hunts like passengers on a sinking ship. The Clovis legacy challenges our assumptions about cultural collapse. Unlike the stereotypical lost civilization, their story may be one of quiet transformation rather than extinction. Modern indigenous cultures like the Anishinaabe carry oral traditions of great climate shifts and animal transformations, echoes, perhaps, of ancestral memories from this very era. As geneticists trace DNA links between ancient Clovis remains and contemporary native populations, a new narrative emerges, not of replacement but of resilience woven through generations. Their fluted points, once symbols of a singular culture, now stand as markers of humanity's endless capacity to reshape itself when the world changes beyond recognition. From the frozen steppes of Siberia to the windswept plains of North America, humanity's survival playbook varied dramatically across continents, yet everywhere, ingenuity flourished under pressure. In Europe, where vast ice sheets loomed largest, communities like those at Pridmosti in the Czech Republic turned mammoth graveyards into survival hubs, repurposing ribs into sled runners and stacking skulls into windbreaks. Meanwhile, along the Mediterranean's shrinking coasts, shell middens taller than houses reveal how groups like the Natufians in the Levant pivoted to marine resources, crafting fishhooks from bone and weaving nets from wild flax. The contrast couldn't be starker. Inland clans followed reindeer herds across tundra, while coastal foragers timed their movements to tidal cycles and seabird migrations. Asia's story unfolds in layers of birch bark and volcanic glass. At Japan's Kamakurawa rock shelter, traces of lacquer-treated baskets suggest an early waterproofing technology ideal for storing acorns soaked to remove toxins during harsh winters. Further west, the Denisova Cave's inhabitants stitched together garments from fox and wolf fur using bone needles so fine they rival modern embroidery tools. But perhaps the most startling adaptation comes from Siberia's Ushki Lake site, where dwellings featured raised floors insulated with moss, an ancient precursor to modern thermal insulation. These weren't just shelters, they were microclimates engineered against the cold. Crossing into the Americas, the Clovis people's spear points tell a tale of precision hunting, while coastal groups from California to Chile left behind shell rings marking seasonal gathering sites. At Monte Verde in Chile, preserved footprints lead to huts lined with medicinal plants, evidence of early healthcare knowledge. What unites these disparate strategies is their deep attunement to local ecologies. Where European groups relied on megafauna, Asian cultures exploited diverse small game, and Americans mastered both riverine and grassland resources. The vanishing of mammoths, giant sloths, and other megafauna forced brutal reckonings. In Europe, the loss of woolly rhinos coincided with an explosion of smaller, faster prey like red deer, spurring innovations like the bow and arrow. Asia's shrinking grasslands saw the last steppe bison herds vanish, pushing groups toward river valleys where fish weirs and nets became lifelines. America's megafauna collapse was most dramatic. With mastodons gone, the Folsom people refined their tools to hunt bison, their spear points evolving into razor-thin blades perfect for precision strikes. These extinctions weren't just ecological shifts, they were cultural crossroads. The societies that thrived weren't those clinging to old ways, but ones embracing change. When the mammoths disappeared, so too did the cultures built around them. The survivors, those who saw the crisis coming, who diversified their diets before desperation forced their hand. Their legacy whispers a warning across millennia. Adaptability isn't just a skill, it's the thread that weaves through every chapter of human survival. The disappearance of mammoths and other giants didn't just change the landscape, it shattered humanity's survival playbook overnight. Picture a hunter standing where a mammoth trail once stretched as wide as a riverbed, now grown over with shrubs. The bones of these behemoths tell a grim story. From 34 species of North American megafauna, only 9 survived the Younger Dryas. Creatures that had shaped ecosystems for millennia, woolly rhinos with their furnace-like body heat, ground sloths weighing over 4 tons, saber-toothed cats with fangs like steak knives vanished from the fossil record in what geologists call the Quaternary extinction event. For humans who'd built entire cultures around hunting these animals, it was like waking up to find every supermarket shelf suddenly empty. The question of what caused this collapse sparks fierce debate even today. On one side stand the overkill theorists, pointing to kill sites like Clovis, New Mexico, where stone spear tips still lodge in mammoth ribs. Their argument is simple: humans, armed with new hunting technologies, became too efficient. But the climate camp counters with ice core evidence. As temperatures seesawed during the Younger Dryas, grasslands shrank faster than herds could adapt. Some species like the mastodon faced a double whammy. Their stomach contents reveal they were still eating their usual twigs and mosses even as these plants became scarce, a tragic mismatch between instinct and reality. What's often overlooked is how these debates mirror modern conservation dilemmas. The passenger pigeon's extinction proved even abundant species can vanish quickly under pressure, just like the Younger Dryas bison herds that dwindled from millions to thousands in centuries. But the real lesson lies in how humans responded. When mammoth hunts failed, survivors didn't just mourn, they innovated. In the Russian Far East, archaeological sites show a dramatic shift. Layers once filled with mammoth bones give way to strata packed with fish vertebrae and bird feathers. At Florida's Little Salt Spring, divers recovered a 12,000-year-old wooden stake still embedded in a giant tortoise shell, proof that hunters turned to smaller, slower prey when giants were gone. Filling these empty ecological niches required more than just new targets, it demanded new social structures. Hunting a mammoth was a communal spectacle, but snaring rabbits or netting fish rewarded patience and subtlety. Tools shrank accordingly. The iconic Clovis points gave way to delicate bird dart tips and fish gorges no thicker than a matchstick. Some groups took this further, like the Natufians of the Levant, who began managing wild stands of wheat and barley, the first steps toward agriculture. Their stone sickles, glossed from cutting countless stems, whisper of a revolution in progress. The most fascinating adaptations were cognitive. Tracking a mammoth meant reading trampled grass and broken branches, but exploiting smaller species required encyclopedic knowledge. Modern hunter-gatherers like the Hadza can identify over 300 plant species by sight, a skill likely honed during the Younger Dryas' scramble for alternatives. Poison-tipped arrows for monkeys, basket traps for eels, even techniques for leaching toxins from acorns. All these survival hacks bear the fingerprints of a species forced to think smaller. Yet this shift carried hidden costs. Smaller game meant less fat to fuel human brains, which had evolved on calorie-rich mammoth feasts. Some anthropologists believe this nutritional squeeze triggered a slight reduction in average brain size around this period, a sobering reminder that adaptation isn't always upward progress. But the trade-off granted something priceless: flexibility. Where mammoth specialists vanished with their prey, generalists thrived, their descendants eventually peopling every continent except Antarctica. The giant's extinction wasn't just an ending, it was the brutal midwife of human diversity. Long before the first fields were planted, humans weren't just surviving their environments, they were reshaping them with deliberate precision. Take fire, that primal force our ancestors harnessed like a sculptor wielding a chisel. Across continents, charcoal layers in ancient soil tell the same story. Controlled burns cleared dense underbrush to encourage fresh growth, luring game animals to tender new shoots. In Australia's Arnhem Land, Aboriginal fire stick farming dates back over 40,000 years, creating patchwork landscapes where kangaroos thrived near human camps. But this wasn't arson, it was ecology by design. By burning small sections in rotating cycles, early humans engineered environments where food came to them, reducing dangerous long-distance hunts. The Younger Dryas amplified these practices from strategy to necessity. As megafauna vanished, people turned to subtler ecosystem tweaks. Along the Jordan Valley, archaeologists find grinding stones stained with wild barley residues, evidence that foragers weren't just gathering grains, but selectively scattering seeds near seasonal camps. Modern experiments show these casual acts of dispersal could boost yields by 30% within generations. Similar patterns emerge with fruit-bearing trees. At Ohalo Roman II in Israel, 17,000-year-old remains reveal concentrated stands of wild figs and almonds near hearths, suggesting humans encouraged useful plants while weeding out competitors. These interventions marked the blurred line between foraging and farming. In the Zagros Mountains, goats began appearing outside their natural ranges near human settlements as early as 12,000 years ago, not yet domesticated, but already following altered migration routes baited with salt licks. The same principle applied to wetlands, where early engineers built fish weirs that funneled spawning salmon into easy harvests, effectively farming rivers without pens. Even waste piles became accidental experiments in domestication. Squash seeds discarded in nitrogen-rich midden heaps sprouted larger fruits, unconsciously selecting for desirable traits. The abrupt end of the Younger Dryas around 11,600 years ago didn't just bring warmer weather. It unleashed pent-up human ingenuity like a thawed river bursting its banks. As glaciers retreated, those centuries of microenvironment tweaking exploded into full-blown agriculture across multiple regions simultaneously. The Fertile Crescent's wild wheat, previously scattered by trial and error, was now deliberately sown in prepared fields. Squash varieties once casually tended in garbage piles became staple crops. What began as survival improvisation during the cold snap crystallized into civilization's foundation. Yet this transition wasn't uniform. Some groups clung to mobile foraging, their landscapes still shaped by fire but resisting full domestication. Others, like the Jomon people of Japan, developed semi-sedentary cultures based on engineered chestnut forests without adopting cereal farming. The difference often lay in memory. Those who recalled pre-freeze abundance resisted farming's drudgery, while communities forged entirely during the harsh Younger Dryas embraced it as liberation. When the ice finally loosened its grip, humanity didn't just adapt to nature. We'd learned to rewrite its rules, one smoldering ember and scattered seed at a time. Then, as abruptly as it began, the Ice Age's grip shattered. Around 11,700 years ago, global temperatures skyrocketed, rising as much as 10 degrees Celsius in some regions within just decades. Greenland's ice cores tell the story in chemical whispers. Oxygen isotopes spike upward like a fever chart, marking the swiftest natural warming event in Earth's recent history. Where the Younger Dryas' onset had been a slow suffocation, its end came like a lightning strike. Pollen records show birch and pine forests exploding northward at nearly 2 kilometers per year, their seeds carried by winds that no longer bit with frost. Coastlines drowned anew as glaciers vomited meltwater into rising seas, but this time the flood brought life rather than famine. What unleashed this climatic whiplash? The leading culprit hides in ocean sediment layers off Norway's coast. There, traces of freshwater pulses from collapsing ice sheets reveal the Atlantic's conveyor belt of currents stalled for over a millennium finally lurching back to life. As warm Gulf Stream waters surged northward again, they dragged springtime behind them like a tidal wave of green. Some researchers point to volcanic activity too. Sulfur deposits in Antarctic ice suggest eruptions may have darkened skies just enough to briefly mask the warming, creating a pressure cooker effect that exploded when the ash cleared. Unlike the impact theories surrounding the cold snap start, this thaw left no room for debate. Its speed was written into every tree ring and cave formation across the planet. For humans who'd spent generations crouched against the cold, the sudden shift must have felt apocalyptic in reverse. At Germany's Lake Hulls Mar, sediment layers transition from barren dust to pollen-rich mud in less than a human lifetime. Imagine watching your childhood hunting grounds transform before your eyes, swamps drying into meadows, tundra giving way to thickets where boar and aurochs multiplied like dreams made flesh. But survival had honed these communities too well for complacency. Where their ancestors had scrambled to adapt to cold, now they pivoted to manage abundance. In the Fertile Crescent, wild wheat and barley stands grew so dense they could be harvested with wooden sickles, a bounty so reliable it allowed groups like the Natufians to build stone houses and grind grain in mortars carved directly into bedrock. The most astonishing transformations happened at civilization's frontiers. Along Scandinavia's melting edges, reindeer hunters transitioned to sealing and fishing within generations, their art shifting from mammoth ivory carvings to intricate amber net sinkers. In Japan's warmer forests, German potters who'd survived the cold by storing nuts in pit houses now crafted flame-rimmed ceramics to boil shellfish and ferment wild grapes. Even the Americas saw revolution. At Texas Galt site, Clovis descendants traded their iconic spear points for grinding slabs, processing prickly pear and pecans alongside dwindling bison hunts. This wasn't just adaptation, it was metamorphosis, as if the Ice Age's chrysalis had cracked open to reveal wings no one knew they'd grown. What began as desperate improvisation during the freeze now crystallized into permanent innovation. The same storage pits that once hoarded acorns for famine winters became granaries for cultivated grains. Traps designed to snare scarce rabbits now managed multiplying flocks of sheep. And those social networks forged through shared hardship, they became the scaffolding for villages, then cities, then empires. The Younger Dryas had been humanity's crucible, not just testing our ability to endure, but proving our genius for turning crisis into catalyst. When the ice finally retreated, it left behind not scars, but blueprints for agriculture, for architecture, for the very art of thriving in a world forever changing. The world that emerged from the Younger Dryas was almost unrecognizable, a place where winters no longer dragged on like death sentences, and the very air seemed thick with possibility. As glaciers retreated, they left behind soils rich with glacial flower, fertile grounds where wild grasses grew taller and denser than ever before. In the Levant, stands of wild wheat and barley now produced seeds so abundant they could feed entire villages with just weeks of harvesting. But this bounty came with a catch. The same warming that unlocked plenty also triggered chaos. Melting ice sheets sent sea levels rising 3 feet per century, drowning coastal campsites that had been home for generations. For humans who'd spent over a millennium adapting to scarcity, sudden abundance was its own kind of revolution. one that demanded entirely new ways of living. The first signs of this transformation appear in the simplest of objects: a sickle blade glossed from cutting countless stalks, a grinding stone worn smooth from processing grain. At Abu Huraira in Syria, archaeologists uncovered houses with clay ovens and storage pit structures built to last more than a season. These weren't just shelters, they were statements of permanence. Families who had once followed reindeer herds now found themselves anchored to fields of wild rye, their children playing amid crops that would feed them year after year. The shift wasn't instantaneous. Early farmers still supplemented their diets with hunting, but the balance had tilted. Where Ice Age nomads carried everything they owned, these new settlers accumulated pottery, looms, even decorative beads signaling something unprecedented: leisure time. Population rebounds tell their own dramatic story. Skeletal remains from this period show fewer signs of malnutrition, with children growing taller and adults living longer. At Turkey's Çatalhöyük, a Neolithic city of thousands, murals depict not just hunting scenes but sprawling landscapes teeming with life, a visual ode to abundance. Genetic studies reveal why, as agriculture spread, human populations exploded, doubling and then tripling in regions where wild cereals thrived. But this boom came at a cost. The same settlements that provided security also bred disease, with skeletons showing traces of tuberculosis and tooth decay from starch-heavy diets. Resilience, it seemed, wasn't just about surviving hardship. It was about navigating the unintended consequences of success. The most profound changes were social. Stored grain required protection, giving rise to early hierarchies. Those who guarded supplies became leaders, then rulers. At Göbekli Tepe, towering limestone pillars carved with snarling beasts suggest communal rituals where feasting cemented alliances between growing villages. Unlike the Ice Age shamans who communed with spirits for survival, these new spiritual leaders presided over harvest festivals, their ceremonies timed to equinoxes and planting cycles. Even conflict transformed. Where clashes over hunting grounds had been fleeting, territorial disputes over farmland now sparked wars that left mass graves like those at Talheim in Germany, where an entire community was massacred with stone axes. Yet amid these upheavals, the legacy of the Younger Dryas endured. The same cooperative child-rearing networks that sustained Ice Age camps now allowed farming communities to thrive, with grandparents teaching crop rotation while parents tilled fields. Storage techniques honed during frozen winters became granaries bulging with surplus. Most strikingly, the human mind, forged in an era of constant adaptation, now turned its creativity toward art, music, and architecture. The plastered skulls of Jericho, decorated with seashell eyes, weren't just memorials, they were declarations that survival had birthed something greater. Standing at the threshold of the Holocene, our ancestors didn't just cross into a warmer world, they carried the lessons of the Ice Age in their bones. When the next crisis came, drought, flood, or plague, they didn't default to old ways, they innovated anew. That's the true testament to their resilience, not merely enduring change, but harnessing it to build everything from the first mud brick houses to the soaring temples of Sumer. The Younger Dryas had been their crucible, and from its fires emerged not just survivors but shapers of worlds. The lessons of the Younger Dryas aren't locked in the past, they're a blueprint for our planet's future. As we face our own climate crisis, the parallels are impossible to ignore. Our ancestors didn't have satellites or climate models, yet they read the signs in withering plants and fleeing herds, adapting with breathtaking speed. Today, we're armed with data predicting rising seas and shifting weather patterns, but the core challenge remains the same: how to transform survival into reinvention. The difference: they had no choice but to react. we have the rare chance to act first. Consider the ingenious diversity of Ice Age solutions: coastal communities turning to shellfish, inland groups mastering seed storage, nomadic bands refining lightweight toolkits. This wasn't just resilience, it was localized innovation at scale. Modern climate strategies echo this wisdom. Indigenous fire management in Australia mirrors prehistoric controlled burns, reducing catastrophic wildfires. Dutch engineers designing floating cities recall the wetland adaptations of Younger Dryas fisherfolk. Even the revival of ancient drought-resistant crops like teff and amaranth in drought-stricken regions proves that the past holds keys to our future. Yet the most urgent parallel lies in social cohesion. Ice Age clans thrived by sharing knowledge across generations and territories. Obsidian tools traveled hundreds of miles, while oral traditions preserved survival tactics. Today's climate crises demand the same collaborative spirit. When farmers in Senegal revived traditional rainwater harvesting techniques, they tripled crop yields without modern irrigation. When Tuvalu's leaders petitioned for global climate action, they channeled the same collective voice that once helped Ice Age villages negotiate resource scarcity. The stakes are higher now, but the principle endures. Isolation is extinction. Humanity's genius has always been turning constraints into creativity. The Younger Dryas forced the invention of needle and thread, the first steps toward agriculture, the birth of communal storytelling. Our crisis calls for equally bold leaps: modular housing for climate refugees, carbon-neutral vertical farms, AI-optimized renewable grids. But technology alone isn't enough. The Ice Age teaches us that survival is cultural as much as technical. Just as mammoth bone huts required every hand to build, modern solutions need policy shifts, education reforms, and grassroots movements. This story matters because it rewrites hopelessness into possibility. 12,000 years ago, humans stared down a changing world with nothing but flint and courage, and emerged not just alive but thriving. We stand at a similar crossroads, armed with infinitely greater tools. The question isn't whether we can adapt, but whether we'll embrace the same radical cooperation and creativity that once carried us through the long winter. The Ice Age didn't just test our limits, it revealed our limitless capacity to reimagine what's possible when we face the storm together.